"Why is my mom in your family photo?" Naomi Brooks asked, holding the silver frame with both hands. The room did not gasp all at once. It went quiet in pieces. First, the violinist missed a note. Then a woman stopped laughing with champagne still near her lips. Then Edward Harrington, the white billionaire everyone had come to flatter, looked down at the picture in the little black girl's hands, and his whiskey trembled hard enough to spill over his fingers. 3 hours earlier, Naomi had been standing under the yellow porch light of a service entrance, rainwater dripping from the ends of her braids onto the collar of her old brown coat. The mansion in front of her looked less like a house than a courthouse built for people who never had to explain themselves. White stone walls, tall windows, black iron gates, security cameras tucked beneath the roofline, and beyond the glass, the warm gold glow of a charity gala where nobody looked cold, hungry, or afraid. Naomi did not belong there. Her shoes were soft at the soles. Her left sleeve had been patched with thread that did not match. In the pocket closest to her chest was a folded hospital bill from Mercy County Hospital. The red words "Final Notice" pressed so deeply into the paper that she could feel them through the cloth. But that was not why she had come. She had come because, 2 nights ago, her mother had woken from a fever, grabbed Naomi's wrist with a hand too weak to hold a spoon, and whispered a name Naomi had never heard spoken in their apartment before. Edward Harrington. Then her mother had said, "If you ever see that house, don't let them take the picture." At the service entrance, a catering woman rushed past carrying a tray of empty glasses. Naomi slipped in behind her, small enough that the door nearly closed on the back of her coat. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish, expensive perfume, roasted beef, and flowers too perfect to seem alive. She followed the edge of the hallway with her hands close to her sides, the way her mother had taught her to move through rich houses when cleaning crews were invisible but always watched. In the main room, men in dark suits spoke softly about donations. Women touched pearls at their throats. A tall black piano shone under the chandelier. Naomi only meant to find one adult who would listen. Then she saw the photograph. It sat on a narrow table beneath a silver lamp, not hidden exactly, but turned slightly away from the room. The frame was heavy, carved, polished until it reflected the candlelight. Naomi stopped so suddenly a waiter behind her nearly bumped her shoulder. In the picture, Edward Harrington was younger, standing beside his parents and 2 people Naomi did not know. At the far edge stood a young black woman in a pale blue dress, one hand half lifted as if someone had called her name just before the camera flashed. Naomi's breath caught. The face was younger, softer, but she knew the eyes. She knew the small scar near the wrist. She knew the woman because she had watched that same face fall asleep over unpaid bills, bend over laundry baskets, smile through pain so Naomi would not be scared. It was her mother. Naomi picked up the frame. Across the room, Edward Harrington turned at that exact moment, his silver hair neat, his navy suit perfect, his expression trained by decades of rooms that obeyed him. Vivian Harrington stood beside him, graceful in ivory silk, one hand resting lightly on his arm. Naomi walked straight toward them before fear could catch up. "Why is my mom in your family photo?" she asked. Vivian moved first. Not Edward. Vivian. Her smile appeared quickly, too quickly, like a curtain dropped over a broken window. "Sweetheart," she said, reaching for the frame. "That is not your mother." Naomi tightened both hands around the silver edge. Edward stared at the photograph without taking it. For 1 second, something crossed his face so small most people missed it. But Naomi saw it. His eyes did not go to the woman's face first. They went to the scar on her wrist. Vivian's fingers hovered inches from the frame, and her voice softened into something colder than anger. "Give that to me." Naomi looked up at the billionaire, then back at the woman in the picture. "My mama said not to." And Edward Harrington, who had bought companies without blinking, could not take his eyes off the scar he was never supposed to remember. Vivian's hand stayed in the air a moment too long. To anyone else, it might have looked gentle, the graceful patience of a rich woman dealing with a confused child at a private event. But Naomi saw the pause inside it, the tiny calculation before Vivian lowered her fingers and smiled wider. Your mama must look like someone we knew a long time ago, Vivian said. That happens. A few guests shifted behind her. Someone gave a nervous little laugh that died as soon as Edward did not join it. Naomi kept the frame pressed against her coat. The silver edge was cold through the damp wool. No, ma'am, she said. That is my mama. The room changed around that sentence. Not loudly. Rich rooms rarely did anything loudly. They tightened. A man with a donor pin looked toward the hallway. One of the security guards touched the wire at his ear. A young server froze with a tray of water glasses, and one spoon resting on the tray gave a thin, bright tap against the rim of a glass. Edward heard it. He blinked once, as if the sound had pulled him back from somewhere far away. What is your mother's name? He asked. His voice was not warm, but it was lower than Vivian's. Naomi looked at him carefully. Her mother had always told her that powerful people ask simple questions when they were deciding how much danger you were. Lena Brooks, she said. Edward did not move, but the name landed. Vivian did. Her chin lifted by half an inch, and her eyes moved, not to Edward, not to Naomi, but to Martin Vale, the family attorney standing near the fireplace with a folded napkin in his hand. Martin's face stayed polite. Only his thumb rubbed once against the napkin seam. Edward, Vivian said softly, this is not the place. I asked her a question, and she answered it. Vivian smiled at Naomi again. Now let's not embarrass the child any further. The word embarrass made Naomi's ears grow hot. She knew that word. Teachers used it when poor kids asked why the field trip cost money. Landlords used it when her mother counted bills twice in the hallway. Naomi swallowed, then reached into the inside pocket of her coat. The security guard took one step forward. Edward lifted 2 fingers, barely a gesture, but the guard stopped. Naomi pulled out a small photograph folded into a square. The paper had gone soft along the creases, and one corner was stained from a kitchen leak back home. She unfolded it slowly, with the careful hands of someone who owned very few things that could not be replaced. This is my mama last year, Naomi said. She placed the little photo on the edge of a marble side table beneath the big silver frame. In the smaller picture, Lena Brooks stood in a narrow apartment kitchen beside a cheap birthday cake from a grocery store, holding a paper plate while Naomi, younger then, leaned against her hip. The blue dress was faded now, worn under a cardigan, but it was the same dress. At the wrist was the same pale crescent scar. Edward stepped closer. He did not touch the photo. He only looked. Vivian gave a soft breath through her nose, almost a laugh. A dress proves nothing. Naomi looked up at her. Then why did you stop smiling when I said her name? No one in the room seemed to know where to put their eyes. Rain pressed softly against the tall windows. Somewhere beyond the kitchen doors, a television murmured with the late weather report, the everyday sound of a storm moving east across Maryland. For half a second, the mansion felt like any other house with lights on at night. Then Martin Vale's phone vibrated against the mantel. Once, twice. He glanced down before he could stop himself, and Naomi saw the screen light up with a message preview from someone named Vach. Get the photo before he remembers. Edward saw Naomi see it. He turned very slowly toward Martin, and the little folded picture on the marble table no longer looked small at all. Edward did not ask Martin about the message. Not yet. He only watched the attorney's hand close around the phone and turn it face down on the mantel, as if hiding the glow could erase what had already been seen. Vivian's expression remained smooth, but the air around her had changed. She was still beautiful, still composed, still the woman whose photograph appeared beside Edward's in charity magazines and hospital wings. But now her smile had become a locked door. Martin, Edward said quietly. Who texted you? Martin looked up too quickly. My office, most likely. Most likely, Edward repeated. The attorney gave a small laugh, the kind meant to make a question seem rude. It is a fundraiser, Edward. Half the city wants something from you tonight. Naomi kept her fingers on the folded photo. She did not understand every word adults used when they were protecting themselves, but she understood tone. She had heard landlords sound kind while changing locks. She had heard hospital clerks say policy like it was a wall. She had heard men in clean coats call her mother ma'am when they wanted her to stop asking questions. Edward reached for the small photo at last, but he did not take it from Naomi. He looked at her first. "May I?" Naomi hesitated, then nodded once. "Don't fold it wrong," she said. "My mama keeps it flat under the flour tin." Edward's hand paused before touching the paper. It was such a poor detail, so ordinary, that it struck him harder than any accusation. Under the flour tin. Not in a safe. Not in a climate-controlled archive. A life reduced to hiding evidence beneath something used to make dinner. He lifted the photograph carefully. On the back, in blue ink faded nearly gray, someone had written, "Lena, after the storm. October." His chest tightened at the word storm. "Where is your mother now?" he asked. Naomi's chin lifted a little, not in pride, but because she had practiced not looking small. "Mercy County Hospital." Vivian inhaled softly. Edward heard it. Martin did too. Naomi reached back into her coat and pulled out a wrinkled paper folded around a plastic hospital bracelet. "She didn't want me to come here," Naomi said, "but she kept saying your name when the fever got bad." She unfolded the paper on the marble table. It was an old hospital bill, yellowed at the edges and creased so many times the paper had begun to split. The current bill from Mercy County was tucked behind it, but Edward's eyes went to the older one first because Naomi tapped it with one small finger. "This one," she said. She kept it with the picture. Edward leaned closer. The bill was from St. Catherine's Medical Center. Emergency Trauma Unit. October 12, 2011. The date moved through him like cold water. He remembered rain that night, headlights sliding across wet pavement, the smell of gasoline, the sound of someone crying his name as if they had known him forever. Then nothing. Weeks of white ceilings. Family voices telling him not to ask too much. A story repeated until it became safer than memory. Naomi pointed to a line near the bottom. "Witness at intake, Lena Brooks." Edward's mouth went dry. "That name was never in my file," he said. Martin shifted. "Barely." Vivian looked toward the doorway, where the music from the gala drifted in thin and cheerful, as if another world were still pretending nothing had happened. "Hospitals make mistakes," Vivian said. "Especially county hospitals." Naomi turned to her. "This wasn't county. It says St. Catherine's." The correction was small, childlike, exact. A few guests still lingering near the entry heard it. Vivian's jaw tightened, then softened again. "Of course," she said. "I misspoke." But Edward was no longer looking at her. He was looking at the hospital bracelet Naomi had placed beside the bill. The name on it was Lena Brooks. The date was October 12, 2011. And under emergency contact, in letters typed by someone who had no reason to lie, was his private number, the one only family had back then. Edward stared at the number until the digits stopped looking like digits and became a door he had once failed to open. It was his old private line, the one from before the board, before Vivian, before his father died and left him an empire wrapped in instructions. "How did your mother have this?" he asked, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Naomi kept one hand on the hospital bracelet and the other on the little folded photo. "She had it written on paper in the tin box," she said. "Under her bed." Martin Vale stepped forward then, not harshly, not loudly, but with the clean confidence of a man used to making poor people feel unreasonable with perfect manners. "Mr. Harrington," he said, "this is precisely why we should move this conversation out of the public room. The child is frightened. The guests are confused. And we are now discussing private medical documents of questionable origin in front of donors." He turned to Naomi with a softened expression that made his words worse. "Naomi, sweetheart, I know this may feel important to you, but adults need to handle adult matters carefully." Naomi looked up at him. She did not answer. The word child had done what it was meant to do. It made her smaller without anyone touching her. A board member with silver glasses nodded from near the doorway. "Martin is right, Edward. There are liability issues here." Another woman, One Naomi had seen smiling beside a giant cardboard check near the entrance, whispered that someone from security should call child services before this became a spectacle. Vivian's face tilted with sympathy so polished it looked rehearsed. "No one is blaming you, Naomi," she said. "But you came into a private home, during a private fundraiser, carrying papers you may not understand. That can put your mother in a difficult position." Naomi's fingers tightened around the bracelet until the plastic edge pressed a red line into her palm. For a second, the mansion seemed to rise over her. The chandelier, the marble, the oil paintings of Harrington men in black coats, the guests with clean hands and soft voices. Everyone had a reason she should stop talking. Everyone had a word that sounded responsible. Privacy, liability, procedure, safety. Edward saw her shoulders draw inward, just a little, and something in his face shifted, but he still did not know which piece of the room was lying. The kitchen doors swung open and closed behind a server. From far away came the small domestic sound of water running in a sink, a dish set down, a spoon turning once against porcelain. For one breath, Naomi thought of her mother standing at their apartment sink at midnight, washing the same cup over and over because there were no clean dishes left and no energy to wash more. Then Martin reached for the old hospital bill. "Let me preserve that properly," he said. Naomi moved it back before his fingers touched it. "No, sir." The room went still again. Martin's smile thinned. "I'm not taking it from you." "Yes, you are," Naomi said. "You just said it nicer." Edward looked at Martin then. Not sharply. Closely. Vivian stepped in before silence could become accusation. "This is enough. Mr. Cole," she said to the nearest security guard. "Please escort Naomi to the side parlor and ask Mrs. Bell from staff to sit with her until we contact the hospital." It sounded kind. It sounded orderly. Mr. Cole approached with one hand open, palm visible, as if calming a stray animal. Naomi did not run. She reached into her coat and pulled out one more thing. A small brass key on a faded purple string. "My mama said if the people in this house tried to separate me from the papers," she said, "I should ask why this key opens something with your family name on it." Vivian's eyes flicked to the key and away too fast. Martin Vale saw it too late to stop himself from whispering, "The North Archive." And only after he said it did he realize the child had never told him what the key was for. Martin's whisper seemed to hang in the room longer than the rain against the windows. The North Archive. Edward turned his head slowly, not toward Naomi, but toward the hallway that led deeper into the mansion, past the public rooms, past the music, past the framed photographs meant for guests, into the older part of the house where his father had kept things no one discussed. Vivian recovered first. "Martin misspoke," she said, her voice smooth again. "There are dozens of archives in this house. Old properties, charity records, family storage. A child with a random key does not mean anything." Naomi closed her fingers around the brass key until it disappeared in her palm. "It is not random," she said. "It was in the tin box with my mama's name on the envelope." Edward looked at her hand. "May I see it?" Naomi studied him for a long second. Then she did something that made several adults uncomfortable. She did not give the key to Edward. She laid it flat on the marble table between them, beside the hospital bill, the bracelet, and the folded photograph, as if making a border no one had permission to cross. The key was old, darker near the teeth, with a faded purple string tied through its head. Attached to the string was a small paper tag, softened by age. On one side, someone had written NA in pencil. On the other side, in the same careful handwriting as the old hospital note, were 3 words, "After the storm." Edward did not touch it at first. He only stared. That phrase had appeared on the back of Naomi's photo. Lena after the storm. October. It had sounded poetic then, maybe something private, maybe nothing. But now it was written again, on a key that Martin had recognized before he meant to. The room breathed around Edward, but he did not seem to breathe with it. Vivian stepped closer, her perfume drifting over the table, sharp and floral. The same kind of expensive scent that filled department stores near Christmas. Naomi smelled it and remembered something her mother once said when a woman in a cream coat came to their apartment building years ago. She smells like flowers that never touch dirt. Where did your mother get this key? Edward asked. Naomi's eyes stayed on Vivian for a heartbeat before returning to him. She said someone gave it back by mistake. Martin adjusted his cuffs. That is absurd. Edward, this is becoming theatrical. Naomi reached into the deepest pocket of her coat. It took her a moment because the lining was torn, and her fingers had to search past loose thread and a peppermint wrapper. When her hand came out, she was holding a tiny digital recorder, silver paint worn away at the corners. My mama used this when people came to the apartment, she said. She said sometimes grown-ups remember different when there's no sound. Vivian's face did not change, but one hand lowered to her side and gripped the seam of her dress. Edward noticed. Naomi pressed the small button. The recorder crackled first, then hissed. For a few seconds there was only apartment noise. A washing machine thumping unevenly, rain tapping against a window, a TV playing softly in another room. Then a woman's voice came through, controlled and quiet. Vivian's voice. Lena, you do not want your daughter growing up in courtrooms. Give me the box, and I can make the hospital bills disappear. Naomi stopped the recording before it could continue. The silence after it was worse than the sound. Edward looked at Vivian, really looked at her, at the steady mouth, the pale silk, the eyes that had stood beside him at funerals, charity dinners, board meetings, and every anniversary of the accident. You went to see Lena, he said. Vivian's answer came half a second too late. I went to protect you. Edward's gaze dropped to the key, then to the recorder, then back to the woman he had trusted longer than he had trusted his own memory. From what? He asked softly. Or from whom? Edward did not answer Vivian's question for her. He simply let it remain in the air, quiet and unfinished, until she had to stand inside it. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out his phone. Vivian's eyes moved to the screen. Martin's did too. Edward noticed both of them notice. He turned the phone slightly away, not enough to look secretive, only enough to make clear he no longer owed the room his next thought. Claire, he said when the call connected, his voice even. I need the security feed from the North Hall and archive entrance for tonight. Also pull the access logs for the old family wing. Send them only to my private server. A pause. His assistant asked something Naomi could not hear. Edward looked at the brass key on the table. No. Not through Martin's office. Martin's expression barely shifted, but the skin around his mouth tightened. Vivian gave a small, wounded laugh. Edward, surely you are not letting a child with a pocket recorder turn this house into a crime scene. Edward ended the call before answering. I'm checking a door. A door your father sealed for a reason. The sentence came out too quickly. Vivian heard it after she said it. So did everyone else. Edward looked at her, and for the first time that night, there was no husband in his face, no host, no man trying to preserve dignity in front of guests. There was only a businessman studying a contract with one page missing. Naomi slid the recorder back into her coat. I don't want your money, she said. The words were small, but they traveled. My mama said if rich people offer money before they answer questions, they're not helping yet. Edward's eyes lowered to her. What do you want, Naomi? She looked at the hospital bracelet, the photograph, the key, all lined up on the marble like fragile witnesses. I want my mama safe, she said. And I want somebody to say she didn't lie. No one moved for a moment. From somewhere behind the swinging kitchen doors came the thin blue murmur of a late-weather broadcast, then the ordinary clink of a spoon against a glass. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, soft enough that the room might have relaxed around it if Claire's message had not arrived on Edward's phone at that exact second. He opened it. 2 files. One was the current security feed. The other was an access report from the North Archive. Edward read without changing expression, but the silence around him changed temperature. The old family wing had been opened 3 times in the past month. Not by maintenance, not by archival staff, by Vivian Harrington's personal keycard. The most recent entry was 2 nights ago at 11:42 p.m., less than an hour before Lena Brooks was admitted to Mercy County Hospital. Beside that entry was a note from the security system. 7 minutes of camera footage unavailable. Technical interruption. Edward stared at the phrase, technical interruption. He had seen words like that before in board reports when someone wanted a failure to sound like weather. Is there a problem? Vivian asked. Her voice was soft, concerned, almost tender. Edward locked the phone and placed it face down beside the evidence, just as Martin had done earlier, but this time the gesture was deliberate. No, he said. I'm beginning to understand the problem. He turned to Naomi, then to the old photograph of Lena in the blue dress, and something heavy settled behind his eyes. For 15 years, he had believed Lena Brooks was the person who disappeared from his life. Now he understood she may have been the only person who had tried to stay. Edward did not move toward the North Archive right away. That was what Vivian expected him to do, and Edward Harrington had built half his fortune by never taking the first door a desperate person offered him. Instead, he looked at Naomi and spoke in the same low voice he used with frightened shareholders and dying companies. Your mother told you the key opened something with my family name on it. Naomi nodded. She said the room smelled like old paper and lemon wax. Martin's eyes flicked up. It was quick, but Edward caught it. Interesting, Edward said, because the public archives don't use lemon wax. Vivian folded her arms slowly, trying to make patience look like innocence. Edward, this is absurd. Maybe. He turned to the nearest security camera tucked high in the library corner, its small red light blinking once, then holding steady. Claire, he said into his phone, still connected on speaker now. Keep this room's recording active and back it up externally. Martin stepped forward. Edward, I strongly advise against recording privileged family discussion. Edward did not look at him. Then stop discussing crimes in my library. The room went so still that even Naomi looked up at him. Not because he had shouted. He had not. That was what made it frightening. He picked up the brass key with a handkerchief and placed it on the table directly beside the unsigned guest ledger from the fundraiser. Then he did something small enough that Vivian almost missed it. He slid the old hospital bracelet toward Naomi instead of toward Martin. Tell me the number on the bracelet, he said. Naomi leaned over it. 0749. Edward opened a drawer in the library desk and removed a black leather binder. His father's emergency records. Martin's hand stopped on the back of a chair. Vivian's phone vibrated inside her silk clutch. Once, twice. She did not touch it. Edward turned a page. My hospital intake code from October 12, 2011, he said. 0749. Naomi's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Her strength was not in understanding every legal word. It was in remembering what adults forgot children could hear. Edward looked at Vivian. You told me Lena Brooks came to the hospital the next morning asking for money. Vivian's face stayed composed. That is what your father told me. No, Edward said softly. You said you saw her yourself. Vivian's lips parted, then closed. A glass of water sat untouched near her hand, clear and still beneath the lamp. Edward turned the bracelet so the timestamp faced upward. This bracelet was printed at 1:16 a.m. The crash happened at 12:42. My ambulance arrived at 1:03. If Lena came the next morning, Vivian, how was her name printed on my emergency contact record before I was even stable? Martin said. Hospital staff could have entered it later. Naomi looked at him. No, sir. Martin's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Naomi pointed to the small smudge of blue ink near the printed time. My mama writes sevens with a line through them. She wrote that on the edge because she said the nurse kept saying the wrong room. Edward bent closer. There it was, barely visible. Room 7B, written in Lena's hand. A child's simple memory. A mother's small habit. A lie beginning to split. Edward picked up Vivian's phone from where she had set the clutch down on the table, but he did not open it. He only watched her face. Would you like to repeat, on camera, that you never went to see Lena Brooks before tonight? Vivian's hand hovered over the clutch, frozen above the clasp. The red camera light blinked in the corner. Martin looked toward the door as if measuring the distance. Naomi stood very still beside the marble table, her coat still damp, her fingers resting on the photograph of her mother. For the first time all night, Vivian looked not at the papers, not at Edward, but at Naomi, and understood the little girl was no longer standing in that mansion alone. Vivian did not answer the question. She did not have to. The room had already heard the space where her answer should have been. Edward left the phone on the table, untouched, beside the bracelet and the photograph. Then he turned to Naomi. "You said your mother told you the key opened something with my family name on it." Naomi nodded. "She said not to use it unless everybody kept saying she lied." Edward looked toward the dark hallway beyond the library doors. "Then we use it now." Martin moved first, not toward the key, but toward the door. "Edward, I cannot allow you to open sealed family council records without reviewing the legal restrictions." Edward did not raise his voice. "You are not allowing anything." The sentence landed quietly, but it took the authority out of Martin's body. Edward picked up the key and held it out, not to a guard, not to Martin, but to Naomi. "You brought it here," he said. "You open it." The North Archive smelled exactly as Naomi had said. Old paper, lemon wax, and something colder underneath, like stone that had not seen sunlight in years. The room was narrow, lined with cabinets and flat file drawers, each labeled in Edward's father's precise black handwriting. Vivian stood near the doorway with her arms folded, careful not to look afraid. Martin stood beside her, pale around the mouth. The small camera above the archive entrance blinked red. Claire had turned on the backup feed. Naomi placed the key into a brass lock marked Harrington Family Medical Trust. Turned with a dry click. Inside was not a stack of money, not jewelry, not anything dramatic enough for the kind of lie that had lived there. It was a sealed cream envelope with Edward's full name typed across the front and, beneath it, a line in faded blue ink. St. Catherine's, Maternity Wing, October 14th, 2011. Naomi's fingers stilled. "My birthday is October 14th, she whispered. Edward took the envelope as if it might break. His hands had signed billion-dollar acquisitions without shaking. Now the paper made them unsteady. Inside was an original hospital birth record, a Polaroid photograph, and a notarized letter never delivered. The birth record listed the mother as Lena Mae Brooks. The father line had been typed first as unknown, then struck through by hand. Beside it, written in the same black handwriting as the cabinet labels, was one sentence. "Do not notify H." Edward stared at the initials. Then he saw the Polaroid. Lena lay in a hospital bed, exhausted and young, holding a newborn wrapped in a white blanket. On the window behind her, reflected faintly in the glass, was Edward himself in a hospital gown, standing in the hallway, one palm against the glass, his face blank with medication and grief he did not yet understand. On the back of the Polaroid, his father had written, "He must never know the child lived." Edward read it once, then again. The room receded from him. Vivian's perfume, Martin's breathing, the camera light, the rain on the old window, all of it went far away. He looked at Naomi, at the shape of her eyes, at the guarded way she held herself, at the little girl he had let a room full of powerful adults shrink down to a problem. His face went colorless. His mouth opened, but no words came. Naomi did not ask to be hugged. She did not say father. She only looked at the paper and then at him. "Did he mean me?" she asked. That was the question that broke him. Edward lowered himself into the nearest chair, not because he chose to sit, but because his knees had stopped trusting the floor. For 15 years, he had mourned a woman as a betrayal and lived beside the people who buried her truth in his own house. Vivian whispered, "Edward, your father was protecting you." Edward placed the birth record, the Polaroid, and the letter on the archive table one by one, lining them up with terrible care. Then he looked at the red camera light and spoke so calmly that Martin flinched. "Claire, call my independent attorney." Claire did not ask Edward to repeat himself. The old Edward Harrington would have called Martin first, then Vivian, then three people whose job was to protect the family name before the truth had time to breathe. This Edward stood in the North Archive with a birth record on the table, a little girl beside him, and the red camera light watching everything his house had once hidden. And Claire, he added, his voice still low, notify the board that Harrington Family Trust records are under independent review. Not internal review. Independent. Martin's face lost the last of its color. Vivian sat very still in the doorway, as if stillness could make her innocent. But Edward did not look at her again until the attorney on speaker confirmed the documents would be secured that night, the archive locked, the footage preserved, and the trust accounts frozen before morning. Only then did Edward turn to Vivian. You will step down from the foundation before sunrise, he said. If you touched a dollar meant to bury Lena Brooks, my attorneys will find it. If you used my father's name to threaten her, they will find that too. Vivian's lips trembled, but her voice remained practiced. After everything I protected? Edward looked at the Polaroid of Lena holding the baby. You protected a lie. He did not let the security guards drag anyone out. He did not need theater. He simply told Martin to surrender his firm's records, told Vivian she was not to contact Lena or Naomi, and walked out of the archive carrying the documents himself, not hidden under a jacket, not passed to staff, not treated like something shameful. Naomi followed with the silver frame held against her chest. At Mercy County Hospital, the lights were too bright and the chairs were too hard. Lena Brooks woke to the sound of Edward's shoes stopping beside her bed, but her eyes went first to Naomi. Baby, she whispered. Did they take it? Naomi shook her head and lifted the frame just enough for her mother to see. No, Mama. I kept it. Lena closed her eyes, and one tear slid sideways into her hair. Edward stood there for a long moment before speaking. I believed the people who had power, he said, and I let that be easier than looking for you. Lena turned her face toward him. Her voice was weak, but it did not bend. I had a newborn, 2 bus transfers, and a hospital bill with your name on it. You had lawyers. Edward took that without defending himself. That was the first honest thing he gave her. Over the next weeks, the consequences did not come as gossip. They came as paper, signatures, resignations, and doors opening that had been closed for 15 years. Martin Vale's firm was removed from every Harrington account and referred to the State Bar. Vivian lost control of the foundation and faced a civil investigation into trust payments used to silence former workers and witnesses. The board heard Lena's name spoken in the main conference room, not as a problem, not as a rumor, but as the woman who saved Edward Harrington's life and was erased for it. Lena's medical bills were handled through an independent patient advocate, not a favor slipped across a table. Her employment records were corrected, back pay was issued from the cleaning contractor tied to the foundation, and Naomi was assigned her own attorney before any DNA test, custody decision, or family agreement was discussed. Edward paid for safety, but he did not try to buy closeness. He came to the hospital cafeteria with soup and sat where Lena could ask hard questions. He listened when Naomi corrected him. He learned that protection did not mean taking over. It meant making sure people with less power still had choices. Months later, the silver frame returned to the Harrington living room, but the photograph inside was no longer turned away from the light. Beside it stood a new picture. Lena in a warm brown coat, Naomi between her and Edward, all three looking uncertain, tired, and real. The mansion was quiet that evening. No dooners. No music. No polished speeches. Just rain on the windows and a kitchen lamp glowing over a small table where Naomi drank a full glass of milk without rushing. Edward watched her set the glass down carefully on a coaster, as if even comfort needed permission. Naomi looked at the photograph across the room, then back at him. She looks like she belongs there now, she said. Edward could not answer for a moment, because the little girl was right. The picture had not made the poor child powerful. It had made the powerful house tell the truth, and at last, the girl everyone tried to silence had been heard.